Hi, everyone. This is Doug, and we're going to do a new series called Famous Quotes on Jesus. This will be episode 1. And so I've been curious lately, why do any Islamic people believe in Jesus? Because they believe he's Messiah and they believe he is the prophet. They do not believe he's the Son of God. Again, I'm not quite sure why that is yet. I'm trying to figure that one out. And they have a lot of other different beliefs from Christianity, or from what I would call the teachings of Jesus. But I'm trying to find out why they have anything in common with Christianity. And the reason I ask this is that I've always noticed that there are anti-Paul sentiments among Islamic people. And I wonder why they even care. Why do they feel any attachment to us that they want to tell us that in the first place? It's just kind of puzzling. Is it they just want to bring down, quote, Christianity, or do they have some other more appropriate purpose? And if so, why? Where did they get that from? And we showed in a recent episode they did not attack Paul for the first 200 years of the faith of Islam. So this they came to the issue about Paul later in time. So it was not at the core of their teachings when they started. So it's not in the Quran. There's no commentaries in the era of Muhammad that would tell you that they were anti-Paul. So that's just interesting. So we're going to take the first step in this area by looking at Paul Williams. He's a blogger and he has a channel called Blogging Theology. And the issues I'm going to ask, while we're going to listen to a small clip from him: why did this Christian convert to Islam? Okay, he's a Brit. You would think he would stay somehow in the, I don't know, Protestant Church of England, but he didn't. And why does Islam believe Jesus was the Messiah and a prophet? Okay, they don't believe he was the prophet. Now, we as Christians believe true Christians, we believe Jesus is the prophet. And so that was what Peter says in Acts chapter 3. And that's where he says in verses 21 to 23 that Jesus is the prophet of Deuteronomy 18, verses 16 to 19. So we cannot agree with Islam that Muhammad is the prophet. So we have disagreements with them. But why do they have any commonality with us, and where did it originate? And you'll see what my theory is if when we get into this. So let me tell you a little bit about Paul Williams. He's blogging. He runs Blogging Theology. This is a channel discussing comparative religion by Paul Williams, a blogger and bibliophile based in London and the south of France. Now, I just have to tell you, I like him a lot because, first of all, I get an insight in someone who shares our Christian experience and belief system at some point in time, and then he's changed or added. He would say added more stuff, but not taken away key portions of it. He's gotten rid of some of the errors that we do have, and we'll get into what he's going to say about the Trinity in this particular clip I'm going to play next. So he is somebody that we can relate to, even though he's changed and moved over to Islam. And many times will quote from our materials, Christian materials, the writings of the early church, and he's going to show us things that basically wouldn't fit within the mainstream and of Christianity. But we shouldn't ignore those things. If there's criticism that can be brought against Christianity, it will truth will always win out. So we should listen. Never be afraid to listen to opposing points of view. In fact, I would say only fear that you're afraid of not listening to opposing points of view, because then you're deliberately just shielding yourself off from any challenges that might reach you to another uh, explanation of how we got to the situation we're in. Okay, so I just want to show you where I'm leading. Now, I'm going to play a clip from him just in a minute, and he's going to talk about Jesus did not teach he was God. And well, people go, well, that's false. No, that's true. Jesus says so in John 17, 1-3. The Father is the only true God, and therefore there's no God the Son. Okay, so just that right there, it rules that whole thing out, and there's therefore has to be a different explanation for all the verses that you think there is. And he's going to tell you one is that the major Trinitarian verse that existed for a time of I think it was Erasmus doing the word studies of the Bible, and he was conned into putting in something there that was never there, and it's known as the Johannine comma, and he'll go into that. So there are verses in the Bible, my friends, that weren't there originally, and it's clear as day. And the reverse is taken out. We've dealt with that in Matthew 19, verse 17. They took out where it says exactly what you're reading here in John 17, 1 through 3. The Father was the only true God. Jesus says in John 19, verse 17, and if you don't believe me, go look at early Christian writings, look at all the quotes that existed prior to Nicaea, and they all say or confirm that. And then I found one or other, and I have an episode on that. So he is right on there. So don't turn your bat channels off and think that he's wrong. He's right. That's why we need to listen to opposing points of view to what we traditionally have accepted as Christianity when it really isn't there. But now I want to tell you, and I'm going to give you my heads up theory of what's going on and why there's any commonality at all between Islam believing Jesus is the Messiah, right? We believe Jesus is the Messiah. They believe he's the Messiah. And we believe Jesus was the prophet. They believe he is a prophet. So that's a difference and a similarity at the same time. Now, I just want to tell you there's a book called The Priest and the Prophet that I obtained and haven't read completely yet. But I'm going to read you the preface today when we get done, and you'll see where likely the commonality there is between Islam and Christianity, true Christianity, is this. There's an Ebionite connection. There was a relative of Muhammad who was an Ebionite. And now if you know the story of Muhammad, he doesn't claim Jesus came down and appeared to him. He claims the angel Gabriel, the same angel who spoke to Daniel, spoke to himself. So that is interesting, isn't it? So, but then you end up with, and I have to honestly say, I've never read more than a page and a half of the Quran. I don't know Arabic. I don't know very much about Islam at all. So I'm not going to tell you I know everything about Islam, but I'm going to tell you that I think the Islamics may not want to look in the direction I'm looking. So I'm going to try to push them to look at their Ebionite origin or Ebionite influence that happened initially. And we'll go a little bit into that today. Anyway, so here we go. We're going to listen to Paul Williams.
But there are also other answers to problems about who was Jesus. Who was Jesus according to Western scholars? He thought he was a prophet. Okay, well, that's what the Quran teaches. What else? He thought he was the Messiah. The Quran teaches that. He did not think he was God. The Quran teaches that. He did not teach the Trinity. He did not teach the Incarnation. He did not found a church, actually, according to historians. And Muslims don't believe he founded the Catholic Church. So there's incredible convergence between the latest Western scholarship is saying about Jesus and what the Quran is also saying about Jesus. And I think that's a miracle of the Quran, which is often not spoken of. We talk about the miracles of the Quran. Of course, there are many. This is all, for me, this is another one.
What other evidences can you give that refute the core beliefs of Christianity?
So that would be one problem. The problem with the Trinity, the two problems, one is Jesus never taught it. It wasn't believed by his disciples. So that's a big problem for me. But secondly, they say that God is one, but the Father is God, the Son is God, and the Holy Spirit is God. So there are three, but they are one. And I'm saying, hey, whoa, back up. So how can the Father be fully God, the Son be fully God, and the Holy Spirit be fully God, and yet there be one God? You've just said there are three gods. The idea of the Trinity evolved very slowly over several centuries. So first you had the idea there was God the Father, and then the issue was, well, who is Jesus in relation to God? And in the second century, particularly, you had the idea that Jesus and God were somehow in relationship, that the God was God, but somehow Jesus was divine in some sense. But it was only really in the third century, at the Council of Nicaea in Turkey, only at the Council of Nicaea was it officially decided by the bishops under Constantine, the emperor, that the Son and the Father were co-equal. They had the same substance, or in Greek, homoousion. Homo meaning the same, and ousia meaning substance. So the Son and the Father were the same substance. In other words, Jesus was God. People often say Nicaea was about the Trinity. It wasn't. The Council of Nicaea doesn't mention the Trinity. That came later in the Council of Chalcedon and Constantinople. At Nicaea, they talked about the relationship between the Son and the Father. And the only Trinitarian verse in the Bible, because there was one, is fake. It was added in later. And we know this, is 1 John 5:7. If you look in your modern Bibles, most modern Bibles have now taken it out. But this says there are three that bear witness in heaven: the Father, the Word, and the Spirit, meaning the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. But this is a made-up verse that everyone now, apart from fundamentalists, agrees was added to the Bible. If you remove that Trinity verse, which all scholars do, there is nothing in the Bible that speaks about the Trinity.
And let me just back him up on something that we don't realize, that verse I quoted you here, John 17:1-3, begins the Nicene Creed. Well, how did they get to the idea that Jesus is God? Well, he mentioned it, the Homoousian doctrine. So this is a doctrine that Constantine took credit for. This was the idea that Jesus had the same substance of the Father, true God from true God, that begotten, not made. He's both begotten and he's not made. He's eternal and he's begotten. So you have to live in this contradictory world in 325 AD. He's correct about that. He's also correct about the Trinity. The Trinity was not adopted until 381 AD at the Council of Constantinople, run by the Roman Emperor. And his lieutenant, Gregory of Nyssa, was the person who persuaded. They did the same thing where they forced people to vote in their favor. That there is a Trinity. The Holy Spirit now is God also. That's what happened. And the explicit explanation of it in a book after that was, Gregory of Nyssa says, this is to prove the falsity of monotheism. You think I'm kidding you? I've done a whole thing on that, and Philip Schaff says the same thing. It's to get rid of the myth of monotheism and to prove those who are in error about who is the one. So you just can't make this stuff up. So, but we have a whole episodes on that, but I don't want to get into the Trinity today. I'm trying to get to the root explanation why they believe, and you could see there, he was saying that they believe that Jesus is Messiah. Isn't that significant? Paul says if you confess Jesus is Messiah in Romans 10:9, you're a Christian. So by Paul's definition, they're Christians, right? So why are we not getting along? Okay, and why are they rejecting Paul, who makes them Christians by that fiat in Romans 10? But regardless, that's not the criteria that Jesus gives. I think you have to follow the words of Jesus, and to do that, I think you have to believe he's the prophet. That's another key thing that's missing in Christianity, of all things. So it's missing in Islam, but it wouldn't have been missing if we knew that the Ebionites were the ones who were influencing Muhammad in the origins. So I want to go and tell you a little story, a digression, if you will, to just begin raising the question, because I'm going to look through this book as time goes on, and we'll see as we study the Ebionite history, this is something we need to know about, that they had a contact with Muhammad right at the very beginning. So let's just take a look at that. Here's the book, Priest and the Prophet, by Joseph Ozzie. And it says this: the Christian priest, and I don't know how to pronounce Islamic or Arabic words, but I'll try. Waraka ibn Nawfal, his profound influence upon Muhammad, the prophet of Islam. Okay. This is a book from 2005, very rare book, and it took me a lot of time to get this, so I wanted to finally read it. And then I just want to show you the chapter outline first. Who is Waraka ibn Nawfal? Genealogy of Waraka, Arab Christians of the Hijaz, 3 Jewish Christian sects, science of religious knowledge, Waraka's ministry in Mecca. Chapter 2, relations between the priest and the prophet, meaning what was the connection between those two, Muhammad. Waraka's mentors, Muhammad. Okay, so he's going to claim that he was the mentor of Muhammad. And Muhammad succeeds Waraka in Mecca. So Muhammad takes the office that Waraka, you'll see he's an Ebionite, he had some sort of office among people who had not yet had Islam there at all, and he was doing a religious office, and Muhammad takes his office. Doesn't that tell you something of a connection? We'll see. And then it says the priest and the prophet shared ministry. So this is going to explain something I did learn from a book called Cover Up by Mr. Googe, that in the Quran, again, I have never read the Quran except a page and a half, is he says there that they made a protection for what's called the Nazari. They would be left alone. They didn't have to participate in Islam, but the Nazari was the Nazarene, and the Nazarene was the name that the Ebionites were using in the 7th and 8th century as a persecution from the Trinitarian Christians who were becoming very strong on them, and they're being driven out of Europe into, and you can see they first go to the Middle East, and eventually they're going to end up in Russia, is what we're going to find out if we study more and more about the Ebionites. Okay, here's the preface. Christianity supposedly disappeared without a trace in the Arabian Peninsula shortly after the emergence of the Islamic Empire that overran this region by the middle of the 7th century, the middle 600s. What this study proposes on the subject of the Christian priest Waraqah ibn Nawfal is that there was a very strong case for a presence of Christians in the cities of Mecca and Medina, or Medina, I think it is. This presence is established by the text of the Quran, which the unorthodox priest Waraqah explained to Muhammad. This took place when the priest translated the sectarian text, the Gospel of the Hebrews. Pause. We have to know that it's a fact that Matthew wrote, and actually the apostles wrote, the Gospel of the Hebrews, and then it became tagged as the Gospel of the Hebrews by Matthew, or words to those effect. And Jerome found this work when he went to the Caesarea Library, where it was always being maintained by the Ebionites / Nazarene sect. So now you see that Jerome does that in the 380s, 390s, and he does a translation in Latin and Greek of the Gospel of Matthew to the Hebrews, and then for some reason it doesn't survive in history. Obviously, it was destroyed deliberately, probably because it's non-Trinitarian, meaning it doesn't endorse the Trinity, and also it had probably other things they didn't like, so they got rid of it. And you got to realize Roman Catholicism is not Christianity; it is paganism. It's Constantine taking over the bishops, putting them on salary, forcing them at Nicaea in 325 on a pain of being exiled, meaning death, exiled outside of Rome to the most extreme fringe of Britain, which was these violent heathen or whatever. They would just kill you just for sport. So that was a death sentence, and only 5 people had courage at the Council of Nicaea to say, I'm not going to accept this idea that Jesus is God. Okay, that's what they were doing. The begotten, not made. He's eternal, and he's not eternal. Don't try to figure it out. Don't square it in your brain. And that's how we're going to explain to you that Jesus is John 17:1-3. We're going to explain it away by saying Jesus, even though he isn't God, he had the same substance of God. Therefore, he is God by substance. So you can still call him God because you're saying he has a homoousia, the same substance of God. Very strange logic, ladies and gentlemen, but when you're being forced under pain of being exiled, you believe in anything. And that's actually, we really have to come to grips with that our bishops were compelled, and Constantine picked the council to be in Nicaea because why? It's all the way hundreds of miles from Rome, and who could not protect us? Who could not go there? Who was key to Christianity at that time? Oh, the Bishop of Rome, Sylvester, the Pope, you might say. He couldn't go because his legs were too weak. That was not a mistake. Constantine picked Nicaea in Turkey, hundreds of miles away, so that the Pope of Rome could never be there. And guess who never, ever, ever signed the Council of Nicaea decrees? Oh, yes, the same Sylvester who lived many decades later, but never would sign those decrees. So the Roman Catholic Church has to face facts. Their own Pope didn't accept the Council of Nicaea decision. Do you get me, friends? How obvious this is, how we were being forced, and even the Pope himself would not succumb to this command that the cowards, the 200 cowards who agreed with Constantine, the 5 brave people who were exiled, that's the truth that's hidden and suppressed when you read any articles on the Council on Nicaea from a Christian, Protestant, or Catholic viewpoint. But I digress. Anyway, so let's continue. Until recently, scholars have assigned the historical precursors of Islam to either Jewish or Christian sources. So some claim it's Jewish sources, but others claim it was Christian sources. And I'm going to be the one who would say Christian sources, and I'm going to say actually Jewish Christian sources. This research allows for both. So he comes up with the same idea. As Waraka, along with many of his relatives living in Mecca, came to accept a Jewish Christian interpretation of a revelation of Jesus Christ and of the early scriptures that proclaimed a Unitarian view of God rather than a Trinitarian theology. Pause. So the one thing I have figured out without reading the Quran is that they're Unitarian. They believe there's one God. Now, if you ask a Protestant or a Catholic, they'll say we believe in one God, but when you break it down, you can't say that 3 gods and one Godhead is a single God. You can pretend that's a single God. You can say that's what my church teaches me, it's a single God. I'm saying to God it's a single God, but God's not going to believe you. God doesn't have to believe and accept anything you say because why? Because my son made it so clear. The Father is the only true God. Go read it in every Bible, and they never altered this because at Nicaea they adopted this as the first premise and then explained it away by the Homoousian doctrine. And again, you're never taught why you could go from this verse to believing Jesus is God, and it doesn't violate this verse. Oh, the Homoousian doctrine. Jesus has the same substance of the Father. And that's how they got around it, my friends. That's how they got around it. It's not really getting around at all. It's just a if you're being compelled on pain of being exiled, which is virtual death, you're going to believe anything. You're going to succumb to anything you have to believe, and that's the bottom line. The entire sub theme of the book of 1984 by George Orwell was to say, if someone tells you I'm holding up uh, uh, 4 fingers, even though you're holding up 5, can you accept that? Can you accept this truth? And by using pain and torture, eventually you're to understand that the main character succumbs and he says, yeah, I see 5 fingers. And by blurring his eyes, yes, I think I see 5 fingers. But anyway, let's continue. The main object of this book is to discover the history of the Quran, which leads us back to the simple and humble priest Waraqwa, who faithfully proclaimed an evangel and a gospel for the Arabs when he translated a book designed for Jewish believers in Jesus the Messiah. He translated the Gospel of the Hebrews. So this is another important source about that Gospel of Hebrews that it's at the fundamental start of Islam. Now you might say, oh, well, then that's really good. Casts the Ebionites at a bad light. No, I don't think it casts them at a bad light. That doesn't, you can see from what Googe is telling us in the book cover up, he's saying that Islam just let them coexist. They were allowed to be independent of Islam, but they were not Islam. So Islam did not decide to follow the Ebionites. They just decided to tolerate them. And that, I would say, is why they ended up going in divergent positions. And you can have, in the 12th century, Muhammad is declared by scholars of Islam that he is the prophet. But if they had accepted the writings of the early Jewish Christian church, they maintained, and it's right there in the book of Acts, that Jesus was the prophet. And when Yahweh speaks over Jesus' head at the transfiguration, he says, listen to him, which is a quote of Deuteronomy 18, verses 16 to 19, that God would send a special prophet like you, Moses, I will make everyone must follow what he says. And that meant it was a universal prophet, by the way, that everyone must follow what he says, or I will hold them to account. And they must listen to him is repeated twice in those 3 verses from Deuteronomy 18, verses 16 to 19. Let me finish here. Then he has thanks to these people and so on. So there it is. So I'm not going to go through it now. I'm thinking of launching a series on this book, and so look for that. And if you're curious about more about what this book contains and what history it gives us of the Ebionites, I think you'll find it fascinating. So we'll do that in upcoming episodes. But I think, on the other hand, I wanted us to see why a person who believed in Christ, believed in Protestantism, was repulsed by what he found and realized this is not a true monotheistic religion. It's a fraud. It's a con job. It's corruptions of our scriptures. And how do you get around the most obvious statement of Jesus Christ? This one, the Homoousian doctrine. He spotted this spot on. And we also don't understand the Trinity was not adopted at Nicaea. It was the deity of Christ. And so sometimes they call it the bi-deity issue. Was resolved at Nicaea. And then when that wasn't enough and the people were still revolting and wouldn't accept the bi-deity of Christ, they said, we're going to make it more complicated for him. We're going to add a third God in a Godhead. And that's what they did in 381 AD, the Council of Constantinople under Emperor Theodosius, basically threatening to, again, punish anybody who wouldn't go along. It was the same thing, another compulsory decision that, you had to obey or you would be punished severely, expropriated of your property, deprived of your bisphoric or whatever that was called, and so on and so forth. So we have a bad memory, and we need to bring back these things. That's what I'm trying to do. And Paul Williams helps us see, in that quote I just played for you, a lot of the reasons why a legitimate Christian feels they can move into something else. But I would say no. I would say no, because particularly I believe it's not optional for us as Christians to believe that Jesus is only a prophet and that Muhammad could be the prophet. The word "the" meant an article, meant there was only going to be one. Only one, the prophet. That's what God meant, is I'm going to send a special prophet. Of course, he's going to send many prophets, but there is only going to be one who's going to be like Moses. Remember, Moses is unique among prophets up to that point, and would be God in Numbers 12 says, all the other prophets I speak through vision and dreams, but with Moses I speak face to face. What God Yahweh is saying in Deuteronomy 18 is, he says to Moses, I'm going to send a prophet like you. So this is going to be another person who is unique, who has a relationship with God different than all the prophets other than that. All the other prophets here, God is saying, looking forward, that includes Daniel, that includes Isaiah, all of that. He says they're at a different lower level, and I speak to them not face to face, but in visions and in riddles. And that is how it would be, except God in Deuteronomy 18 says, I'm going to send an eventual prophet, the prophet, who will be my words will be on his lips, and I will hold all men accountable to what he says. And that is why Jesus is probably the Messiah, meaning the Messiah means a king. It means an anointed king of Israel. So what do we say about kings? You listen to every word they say. You're not allowed to excuse yourself from any of their commands. They're your king, and therefore they have an authority over you. And that God set that up through Deuteronomy 18, which to us should be that Jesus is king, and we follow and obey what he teaches. And that means nobody has the same authority as Jesus Christ. So anyway, but on the other hand, where did Islam come from? And I'm trying to suggest that it seems obvious that they became very animated to fight against idolatry in Mecca. That much I know about Islam. And that idolatry included Trinitarians or any of the idolatries of that era in the greater Arabia at that time. All right. I hope that helps everybody understand a little bit more about Islam and about its origins, and how a person who is a Christian, a true Christian, I believe he was, and he converts to Islam. All right. So I'm going to break off now. And I just want to say, look forward, if you are interested, I'll try to do some readings on the priest and the prophet. Just read it straight out, see what it says, and see if we can find some historical information that would let us understand why we have this. There is some connection between Islam and the early Jewish Christian church. That doesn't mean we're responsible for, the early Christian church is responsible for everything that's happened under Islam any more than Jesus is responsible for any of the crimes committed by the Roman Catholic Church against Jews, against uh, you know, just people in general. And it's is Jesus responsible for the Trinity doctrine? It's very clearly a thing that completely violates his words here in John 17:1-3. No. So there's all kinds of divergences that can happen over time that don't line up with the original. All right. God bless. Take care. Ciao.